We would be honored if you would join us.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Dungeon Crawlers, where we have journeyed across mountains, through the prairies, through the land of darkness and shadow to deliver this episode to you. That's right, we are going to be talking about the
Mordor.
No, not Mordor. We've
not
talked enough
Mordor.
about Lord of the Rings. That can be later when that TV series comes out.
Kroll. We're talking about Kroll.
Yeah, no.
No, not until July.
Not till July. And apparently, even your mom knows about Kroll.
She took me to see Kroll, bro.
Yeah. Anyways, so we're going to be talking about Amazon's adaptation of The Wheel of Time, specifically what would roughly be the first book. And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about a little bit about the book, the series, some ideas and thoughts and differences. And more importantly, we have an expert about this. No, it's not Brandon Sanderson who finished the last 3 books. It's not someone that is, part of the Jordan family, but it is a fan that has read these books, that knows them inside and out, has done his research, and it's Krebs' brother.
That's right.
It is.
Hello, everyone. Yes. So to sum up what Dan said, basically, it's everything you didn't want, was not expecting.
No. It's everything they didn't know they wanted. Okay, so
Yes.
this is my brother Matthew, and I realize that sounds a tad nepotistic, but I want to give him just a moment to establish his Wheel of Time credentials. Matthew, have you read the series in its entirety?
Yes.
How many times?
I can't count that high. No, I've read them several times. It gets difficult though, because when a new book would come out, well, first thing is I started reading this before the series was complete, well before Robert Jordan's untimely passing. And so I actually was caught in that situation where you'd read up to the end of the series and you'd have to wait another 2 years for the next book to come out. So I would go back when the next book was ready to come out and read back from the beginning. So I've read Eye of the World maybe 30, 40 times.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious? That many times? Are you serious?
Pretty close. Yeah. I can think back to it.
I didn't
it
even
was
know
just,
that.
I would go back and do that. Sometimes I would, sometimes it was audiobooks. Sometimes it was the actual book itself. But you've seen my first
Yes.
copy of Eye of the World,
Yes.
which literally fell apart.
Yes.
And you had to get me another one, right?
Yes. Absolutely
Thank
true.
you, by the way.
No problem. I love you. Yeah. I when did you first start reading the Wheel of Time books?
That would have been towards the end of 95, beginning of 96.
So pretty early on in the series inception.
It was only about halfway through.
Because didn't the first book drop in 91, 1990?
You might actually have a question that stumped me.
We'll verify. We'll look
I
that
can
up.
look that up.
But the point is, 95 is pretty early in the series. In terms of release. Okay, so you've read the Eye of the World almost as many times as I've seen Kroll. That's pretty good.
So Eye of the World came out January 15th, 1990.
1990. Okay, all right. So if you started reading in 95, then that means you had a handful of the 14 books that came out. And I remember certain things. I remember you waiting for the next book. I remember you saying another one's coming. I remember we got to like book 12 and you were super stoked, and then there were like 2 more to go. And I remember Robert Jordan passing, and I wouldn't have taken note of it if it hadn't been for you and your fandom. And it doesn't really stop with the books either. There was something else. How else have you expressed your Wheel of Time fandomness, fanaticism?
Well, like a lot of us, I've been a fan of Dungeons and Dragons since I was a kid. So when they had the D20 system come out with a version of the Wheel of Time, I had to jump right on that. And so I got the Wheel of Time D20 rule book, and you were part of the party, and I got our friends together, and we would play every weekend or every other weekend. And I actually started writing my own adventures in the world. And one of the things I love to do is I would find minor scenes that still had some significance, and I would tie the and I'd work that into the story so that our characters would get a chance to meet Lan fighting the Darkhound in Ilion when Moiraine is there and discovers that, spoilers, Samael's running the city. But our characters got to participate in this off-screen battle Lan had with the Darkhound.
That's right. I
And so
remember that.
things like that I used to love to do. And you did mention the completely botched run through the city that I had spent hours writing that you guys completely bypassed because of oh Lord, what was his name?
It was
Gavin?
it was Lord Glaven.
Glaven, that's
Glaven.
right. So, sometimes he was good at the wrong times and bad at the right times.
It's so true. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen who've been listening to the show, when we gave our examples of being agile and being willing to flex with your players, the story that I told of my genius brother throwing away about 14 pages of story, that was it right there. That was it.
I feel your pain. I really feel your pain.
Every experienced GM feels your pain.
So we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, but I am one of those GMs that when I know my group, I write out a story and I know every left, right move that they will possibly make. And my adventures that should maybe be, 15 pages turn into 40, 45, 50 pages.
Says the published author.
Yeah. Because it's okay, I know this guy's going to do this. And if he does this, these guys are going to go there. And this guy's going to do this. So I have all these branches so that I'm ready and I'm prepared. So I have this and I print it out and it looks like one of those, module manuals. And I'm thinking, this is awesome. Totally awesome. We sit in, I tell the scene, the fight comes, they destroy the fight. I know the next step they're going to do, and they throw a complete left hook and go the opposite direction. And I'm looking at all this paper, all this time I put in for the last 2 weeks, and I just have to throw it in the garbage can because they've gone, they didn't go anywhere on script. So at that point, I learned to do bullet points. And not write everything. It's I just want these things to happen. I don't care how it happens. As long as we get there, we're awesome.
Yeah, that's an important lesson I think a lot of GMs have to learn at one point or another if they're going to continue, without going insane.
Yep.
Yeah. So speaking of bullet points and telling the story by beats, the Wheel of Time series on Amazon Prime dropped this year, actually kind of suddenly. I remember it was supposed to come out on a certain day, and then it came out 2 days early. And that was when we got our first. In fact, they dropped the first 2 episodes, if I remember correctly, and then we had to wait for the next one on a weekly cycle. This was, I think, it dropped originally in November. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so and at this point, it's 2 things need to be known, and they're both Captain Obvious moments. Number 1. Folks at home, we are going to be discussing spoilers in the books, spoilers in the show. We are going to be discussing spoilers. If you have not watched the show or read the books, maybe now is a good time to start doing one or the other. Pro tip, you'll get through the show faster. Captain Obvious moment number 2, there has been a lot of controversy about this series. Yeah. This is not very cut and dry. This is not like The Mandalorian, where overwhelmingly fans accept it, love it, and are thrilled at what they've done with canon and even canon and rearrangement. This is not that. This is very much a mixed bag of everything. So much so that we needed a resident expert to help us discuss this, which brings us back to you.
And instead, you get me.
Hey, that's not such a bad thing. I mean, several years back, Krebs came on the show as an expert of Palladium, and now look where he is.
Now I have my own podcast, you future rival. All right, so
there's some really interesting things, and I really want to drop this in here. These are our opinions. This may not be your opinion, and that's okay. These are our thoughts, our opinions. I know we're three guys, you know. I know there are things that will be brought up that may ruffle some feathers, but again, that's okay. It's our opinion, and if it doesn't match your opinion, that doesn't mean we hate you. Doesn't mean you need to hate us. And that's okay that your opinion is different. I want to lay that out because I know, especially on social media and a lot of other platforms, if you don't agree, then you're the enemy. You're not the enemy in our eyes. No. And we hope that you don't see us as the enemy. We just have differing opinions. And that's the wonderful thing about fandoms. You can still have differing opinions and it's going to be okay. It's not like in the movies where you have the Star Trek fans, you have the Star Wars fans, and we have to do it out because we don't like your live long and prosper because, you know, you're a scruffy looking nerf herder. We can coexist. We truly can. My father is a hardcore Star Trek fan, and I can't stand that, but I still love him and we can coexist. He can show up in his white Starfleet uniform and I will gladly hold my my lightsaber and we'll talk about geek stuff. And I hope after this show you guys feel the same way because it's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was a great preamble. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So I have so many questions. I have so many questions and we got to fit it into just under an hour. So here we go. First, before we get in deep, let's start bird's eye view and let's start drilling down. Overall, what did you think of the series as an adaptation of the Wheel of Time book sequence?
You know, for me, in general, I think it was more positive than it was negative. I enjoyed seeing this finally make it to the screen. When you understand some of the context and decisions that why Amazon made some of the decisions that they did, it excuses some of the things that people may otherwise criticize. If the choice is we don't get it at all, or we had to cut this corner to make this happen, then it's like, okay, I'll give you that, you know? And so there's several things like that. Can I give one detail?
Yeah. We will be drilling down into this deeper, but yeah, go ahead and give us an example.
Loyal. One of the big things is loyal. Okay. People want to see an 8-foot tall, shaggy haired, flat nosed, ears that twitch and wiggle and express his moods, and that talks about books, that talks very slow, that keeps calling humans hasty, that doesn't know when to shut up. And instead, they get a large but human-sized person with no ears that talks about books, calls humans hasty, and doesn't know when to shut up. So give it, and Rafe Judkins, the showrunner, explained this one pretty clearly. He's like, we would have had to do a fully CG character, and we could either spend money on that one thing or the effects budget on the whole thing. And given that choice, you know, until we saw the actor in his place, it was kind of a toss-up, right? And then he shows up and it's like, okay, I think that actor got Loyal's character, even if he wasn't as big as we would have expected him to be. That's the kind of decision that, okay, we can compromise on that because it gets this to the screen.
Meanwhile, Peter Jackson and anyone who worked on Harry Potter is off to the side going, we just made giants. And like, we don't, I mean, if you look at how they did Hagrid, if you look at how they did, Aragorn and Legolas versus Elijah Wood and the other hobbits, there are ways to make exaggerated size. There are ways to play with forced perspective. But I definitely hear that like that works when you're on a major cinema production schedule and budget. But the Wheel of Time series was plagued by budget and time and plague constraints. The plague. They were trying to do something extremely ambitious, just as the world was turning to nonsense, right? So that we didn't take that into account. Totally understand that. Okay, cool. So you think that it has more positives than negatives? I think I want to end on the positives because that always makes me feel like we're in a better place. So I want to start by kicking the crap out of this thing.
Don't I get a voice here? What the heck?
Do you get a voice? I don't know. Don't you run the show? Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, Daniel. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I will agree. It definitely has a lot more positives than negatives. It is a good story. If you are not, if you haven't read the books, this is a good introduction to it. Something that I said before the show. This is just a different retelling. Another Gleeman is telling the same story, and he's presenting that to a new audience. That's how I kind of see this. Are there some things in it that kind of detract from the story, that kind of feel like they've been forced in there? Yes. But for the majority of it, some of these changes, are okay. Did they have a huge budget? Did they have some problems? Yes, probably so. But they still got it out. It's still a decent interpretation of it. Is it what every fan wants? No. I don't think we'll ever get that from a book to a TV or movie adaptation. It's just not possible. And I think it's because we have a different Gleeman telling the story.
I totally agree. With this, I'm really curious. I kind of wish we had a non-book reader, somebody who'd only seen the shows and hadn't read the books, on with us today, because there's going to be two different experiences. The people that have never read the books and see this as a cool fantasy series are going to have one experience, and I think that was the jeopardy that Amazon found itself in, is they've got to write this thing for a very rabid, beloved fandom, and for also a new audience that hasn't read the books, but this show may introduce them to the books. And so how do you tell a story that appeals to both audiences? I agree, there was no way you could actually do this that would please everyone in the fandom. And so that's why I think you had to get to the point where if you got more good than bad, I call that a win.
Well, I mean, just look at Disney and what, they bought Star Wars and jumped into that. I don't think they realized the fan base and how rabid they could be, honestly. Because, I mean, with the prequel trilogy and some of these other movies, they really got blasted. And then, and there's like, what do we do? And then Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni come along with The Mandalorian, and everyone's like, oh, this is exactly what we've always wanted. Now, could we have gotten that? Maybe, but we would have had to have found a couple of directors and stuff like that really were fans of this book series. And that may have been a lot more difficult to find than like fans of Star Wars.
I find it interesting that you both view the show as having more positives than negatives. I'm over here thinking, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure that I agree that there are more positives than negatives. And so I'm kind of looking forward to having my mind changed on that, much like when we had the Filoni insights, and that helped me find new sort of like revived value in the prequels. With this series, I had very much the same mindset as you, Daniel, where I was, after the first episode, after the second episode, I had to tell myself consciously that this is the same story told a different way. Yeah. That's what I used to try to enjoy the show, because otherwise I would end up in that really easy toxic trap of, that's not how it is in the book. That's not how they did this. That's not how they, and I still did that to a fair amount, but I tried to hold back because I wanted to enjoy the series. And quite frankly, I'm kind of middle of the road.
Yeah, what you're talking about is themes and continuity. To go back to the Star Wars analogy, The Mandalorian captures the theme and the feel, and everything in it maintains the continuity of the original trilogy. You get to the prequel, and you have to retcon a few things to make those things work. And there was a much different, it changed how Star Wars felt. And I think that was the cause of a lot of the heartburn of some of the fandom. And so when you get to an adaptation, maintaining the theme of the story is really, really important. And that's one of the things I want to kind of get into perhaps later on in the broadcast.
Well, I mean, one of the things, okay, when you're writing a book, you're in a perspective. I mean, through the majority of the book, Rand is the point of view you're really kind of focusing on. He is the main character. With the TV series, they shifted from that. It's Moraine that's now the main character. And I think that has really affected a lot of people, because it's like, and I get that. That's like, here we go, we go to Tatooine, and we're now looking at this story from Obi-Wan's perspective. We've watched it over and over and over and over again. It's always been Luke, and now suddenly we're being told, nope, we're looking at this from Obi-Wan. It's gonna skew a few things, especially when he dies. Now what? So I think that kind of has unsettled some people, and then not only that, there's some changes, some really drastic changes that were made, that I know Matt wants to talk about, and that would be the dragon. Who the dragon is. And I get that we're trying to be a little bit more PC. We're trying to be a little bit more open by changing that fact. But I think that kind of takes away from the story. That's an element that's one piece. It's now where we shift to Moraine's thing. I don't think that's a big thing. But now the dragon thing, I think that is, because traditionally the dragon has been a male, and the last one really screwed things up. It's kind of changed society. So women are now more predominant. They're now the ones in charge because of this failure on this man's part. But when you change that, it kind of takes away from that. So why are women in charge again? Again, nothing against women being in charge. I don't want our female viewers like calling for our heads. But that's what kind of set up the government and a lot of these structures. And now suddenly you're kind of neutering that. And so that is one of these pieces that starts to unsettle this story, where you're kind of like, man, I'm not really jiving with this. And you're kind of like, yeah, it's another telling. It's another telling.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up. We're actually going to get into several of these points. So Matthew, so we've talked about like how we generally feel about the series. Now start taking us deeper. Tell us about the things again. I want to focus on the constructive criticisms first, and then we'll talk about the things that we like about the show. But let's start with like, what was kind of surprising to you in a bad way, or what was off-putting to you? Tell us some of the things that you realized while watching this show.
Well, the biggest thing is kind of what Daniel was introducing right there. For me, when you get an adaptation, it is a different Gleeman telling story. I absolutely agree with that. But it's the same story. The protagonists have to reach the same destination at the end. How they get there may change.
Yeah.
But some of the unforgivable sins of adaptations is where you keep the names but completely change the story. Okay?
So whose line is it anyways?
Where the names are made up and the story doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Or other times you keep the story, but you've completely changed the characters. The characters are what people love in the story. And when you change their personality, when you change their motivations till they're the opposite of who they were in the original medium, people don't like that. At least fans of the original medium will immediately rebel. And then there's the other situation where you've got visual media like this, where, and I kind of write this up to the bitter writer, where he had a script that he couldn't sell, but he got hired to rewrite a script of a good adaptation that did sell, and so he tries to stick his movie or her movie into this other script and completely ruins the story. And that's kind of what, and this got very close to that line, because that's where you start destroying the theme.
Man, that just sounds like The Last Jedi to me, but that's okay.
Well, you may not be wrong.
No, I mean that really is it. We have this fantastic character, this hero that we see, Luke, and then he gets turned into this curmudgeon. And you're kind of hitting on that point where when you defile the character to so much to the point where it's not the same, it really, fans struggle with that.
So in the Karayathon cycle and Prophecies of the dragon was male. It was important that he be male because in this whole world of the Wheel of Time, male and female are distinct and different. Yeah. Gender politics is a crucial piece of the theme of the Wheel of Time. Yeah. And this is why. It is not a question of one being superior to the other. Mm-hmm. His point is one cannot succeed without the other. The whole symbol of the Wheel of Time is a modified yin-yang.
Yep.
You got the white teardrop and you got the black fang.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And the thing is that separately, these each have a lot of power. They can do a lot of things. The one power, the power through which the entire the world was created, is divided into two halves: male half Sidene, female half Sidar. But the greatest works ever done in that world were when men and women worked together. And if you follow the storylines of the different characters in the stories, you'll see men behaving in somewhat foolish fashion, and you'll see women behaving in somewhat foolish fashion. And when they finally get past their pride and start working together, things happen. Good things happen. The success of the story and the success of the battles always come from the two sides cooperating. So it's not a sin to say male is male and female is female. It is an important part of this story.
No, that's the thing that I really liked about the series, because it's teaching. In my mind, when I read this, when I was younger, it was like, wow, look at this. Men and women are coming together and they're achieving amazing miracles. I mean, they're making things happen. When they're not together, things are not going well. And that's life, really. I mean, and I think that was kind of the lesson here is, hey, if we came together, both men and women, got rid of all this sexist inequality and stuff and came together as equals, we can make things happen. And I really liked that when I was growing up. And I think by changing that, like you said, there is that. We went from, okay, we could achieve balance and equality together, and now you just threw that off. It's messed that yin yang up.
You want to talk about, gender equality. You've got nations that are run by women and a matriarchy in the world of the Wheel of Time. And you have nations or political powers that are run by males.
Yep.
And in both cases, you've got some sexism on the part of the men, and you have sexism on the part of the women. They're both equally shown to be somewhat myopic. Their opinions and their biases, whether they're male or female, interfere with their ability to accomplish their objectives. And only when those go away, when people are able to see past their pride and work with a nation, a race, a gender, whatever, that they had previously considered inferior, does the side of the light start to defeat the side of the dark. And that's one of the themes. And there's another major theme that Robert Jordan says was the seed that started this whole thing, and we'll talk about that later. But the male-female part of this is, in my opinion, an integral part of the story. And by diluting that and saying that male is the same as female, you're destroying the point of the Wheel of Time.
Now that's a very valid point, by the way. Now you pointed out that the best things happen when men and women come together, work within equality. Two different words there, kids. When they work together equally, that's when the wonders of the world occur. That's when defeating the dark one happens. But you also said that the dragon being male is important, but you didn't explain why.
Sure. All right. So first of all, the Wheel of Time is things are cyclical. These souls get reborn. Your soul is tied to which side of the one power you can channel if you're born with that ability. Male souls channel Sidene. Female souls channel Sidar. We have one instance where a male soul is put into a female body, and she still channels Sidene, the male half. So it's tied to the soul. This thing needs to be reborn. And also it's interesting that the entity which warps reality and fights against the creator is the only one who we have seen an instance of that cross-body transmigration. But the order of the world is, these men and these women, they each have access to their own side. So with the dragon being male, as Dan mentioned during the War of the Shadow, when they finally succeeded in trapping the Dark One back in his prison, it was only men. And we see this, I think, in episode I want to say 7, I think it was, where there's a conversation between Luz Theron and Latra Posai. where she's the leader
In the
of
old tongue too.
in the old
Yeah.
tongue. I actually love that scene where she makes her pact with the other women and they promise not to help him because they think it's too risky. And this is another big unanswered question. Would the outcome have been different if you had men and women working together? But because they didn't, the men went, Luce Theron and his 100 companions, 100 most powerful male channelers, and they sealed the hole that had been made in the Dark One's prison. At the last moment, the Dark One's counterstrike was he reached out with his corruption and he touched the male half of the power which was being used to hold him in place. As such, that corruption tainted the male half. And because of that taint, everybody who channels the male half of the power goes mad. And we see that in this series. They actually did a pretty interesting job of showing how the madness takes people. One thing I loved about that was that for these male channelers, their madness was their reality. They didn't know they were crazy. And a lot of times the viewers didn't know until later on when these voices they hear or these people they see aren't really there. And I thought that was really well done. That was a good thing that they had done. So anyway, this is why it's important for the dragon to be male. And one of the criticisms I have of the series is the purpose of the Red Aja.
Yes.
Yeah.
They state right there that their job is to track down false dragons. Side note, they never mentioned there could possibly be a true dragon. Every dragon is false in their mind. But if the problem with the dragon coming back is that his madness caused the breaking of the world, then if you have a dragon who is female and is not destined to go mad, what's the problem?
Right.
In fact, it's an excellent opportunity for these Aes Sedai who pull the strings on the kings and queens of the world to instead help this female dragon along, control her, and help her, quote unquote, to magically fulfill these prophecies. And now you have this person that could unite the whole world. And, you know, there's a lot of things you could do with that. So why? But the Red Aja is going after all dragons. But again, without it being a male dragon, their stated purpose no longer makes sense. You took something that Robert Jordan had set up in his world, and you have now, by tinkering with that theme, created a major plot hole and a problem. You can explain it away, but the fact that the Red Aja is chasing down men to save the world because these crazy men are going to destroy the world, the planet, that makes even their draconian actions that they take, there's some virtue to it. There is, you can see why some people would be attracted to that Aja and that purpose.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. The part of this that really I'm struggling with, because the purpose for that group is broken now. Because you're right, their whole purpose is to destroy false dragons, which are men, because they believe they're false dragons, because they go crazy, they're going to destroy the world. But if one shows up as a woman, then what's the point now? But they're a false dragon. You should kill them. But there wouldn't be false because they wouldn't have the taint. So that is part of the story that they're gonna. And I know they don't have to deal with that because Rand is the dragon. So that's the whole big story. And if you don't know that, folks, sorry, you should have listened to Krebs earlier on and gone and watched it or read the book. But really, and they didn't need to change that. They really didn't. Is it a huge deal? I think they could probably just move on and we could be okay. But it does really kind of put a giant plot hole on things. And it kind of breaks the world. The other thing, and maybe that's where you're going, Krebs, is you're going to move on. What they do with Moraine's character really messes things up for later on in future seasons, definitely with future books. There's one scene in particular.
We're doing spoilers, so go ahead.
Well, there's one scene in particular where, and I hate this scene with a passion.
I'm with you.
And I'm sorry for those that enjoyed it.
Let's be clear. The reason, and I feel okay talking about I feel okay saying this because I've talked to Daniel about this before.
Yeah.
We hate the scene because of what it does to the story.
Yes.
And for no other political reasons.
Yeah. This does not further the story. I feel like it was shoved in there for the sake of shoving it in there. And that's where we see Moraine in a secret place. My brain is blanking on who the person is.
Swan
Swan
Sanche.
Sanche.
One son, yeah, yeah, and they kiss, and now there's this. It seems like there's this secret love affair between the two of them.
Yeah,
But
for the record, they do more than kiss, just not on camera.
yeah,
But
yeah, but this really affects future story because there are some major relationships that Moraine has with a man later on that affect things, and vice versa.
Swan as well.
Yeah, and so it's like I feel like this didn't need to be in the story.
Yeah.
They still could have had a secret conversation. They still could have reached the same effect without making that scene what it is. And again, for those that feel like, oh yes, we have one more scene for us, in the LGBTQ world, this is nothing against those people. It's mainly because this so drastically affects the story and changes things. And I felt like it was forced. We could have had a totally different character that we could have put in there, or another series of characters that didn't have these primary goals, that it would have been fine.
I felt the same way too, where I realize as I think through this, that just because Moraine and Swan have this rather, they established that it's a fairly long-lasting, extremely secret romantic relationship with each other, that it's not just a roll in the hay for the sake of it, that this is like a real relationship. I realize that this does not preclude either women having a meaningful romantic relationship with a man, but I also acknowledge that the way that they've established this, it makes that harder to believe, harder to accept, and it makes it harder to actually make happen. And to your point, in the books later down the line, both Moraine and Swan have incredibly important relationships with men that further the story. And I realize, we already said this earlier, this is the same story told by a different Gleeman, and so they're telling the same story a different way. But this goes back to what Matthew was saying, which is now you're changing the core of the characters. You're changing who the characters are. Something that, Matthew, I wanted to add to your list of sins is when you alter the virtues of a character. And I'm not saying that Moraine and Swan aren't virtuous, but I am looking at Rand and Egwene, who in the very first episode run off after she's been made after she's been declared a woman by the Women's Council. They run off, and they obviously have a roll in the hay, and it's apparent it's not the first time that's happened. But some of the best parts of the stories are the tension between these characters because they're so young and they would not cross those lines. There's a certain virtue that's there that they have now removed from those characters, which removes a portion of their innocence in all of this. And I really despised that move. Daniel.
Well, and I want to jump in before we hand it over to Matt. I think the problem here is these characters are a lot older in the TV series than they are in the book. So, of course, now that they're older, that's probably going to be a little bit more acceptable or natural because of their age compared to when they were younger. Because when they were younger, there's still that tension because there's that awkwardness and they're not quite to this. At least to me, I feel like they're somewhere between 18 and 20 in the TV series. Where in the book, they're much younger. I would probably say 15, maybe bordering 16. So I think that kind of offsets that. But you're right, that kind of loses something in the story. But is it something that completely detracts? I don't think so, but it is an annoyance.
I look at these things where things are added in or significant changes are made, and I ask, how does this serve the story?
Yeah.
Does it propel it forward? Does it give it some depth? And that scene with Swan and Moraine, it just feels shoved in. They needed to have a secret conversation. They needed to make the arrangements for her to get exiled. All of that makes perfect sense. Even, and there's some theories that where they met was Teleron Riyadh, the world of dreams, that was how they were able to do it. That would have been interesting to delve into that and what all that means. That's world building. But this whether or not, they rub nasties, does not affect the story one way or the other. And so by leaving or diverging from the original story material to put this in there, and there's a few places in the series where something was gratuitous. Now, there can be things that are added that are necessary for the story, whether they are lascivious or not, or whatever adjective you want to stick to it. But when it doesn't serve the story, here's one of the things that Wheel of Time here's a prejudice Wheel of Time had to face before they became a series. There was a vacuum left by Game of Thrones. And everything that touched on fantasy since then has been trying to declare itself the new Game of Thrones. Now, thankfully, from all reports, Rafe Judkins did not want this to be the next Game of Thrones, but he wasn't the only person making decisions, and there's a lot of people that did want it to go that way. And Game of Thrones is famous for its violence and its sex.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Now, the difference there is that the way George R.R. Martin wrote that was that a lot of those things were essential to the story.
And they were already in the books.
They are very much in the books. It was important to the theme, and it did propel the story forward. And so in those things, even when it gets pretty graphic, it's not necessarily gratuitous. But getting back to Wheel of Time, yeah, there were a few other scenes that I thought were gratuitous, or the same thing could have been accomplished in another way. And if your big challenge with the Wheel of Time is taking this lesser known fantasy property, IP, and exposing it to a broader audience, you'd think you'd want to it's like the difference when a movie maker decides between a PG-13 and an R. You're going to get more people with a PG-13. They could have done some things with this to bring in a larger audience without sacrificing the story. And I think they missed that in this particular scene.
So you know what, to kind of wrap up this branch of the discussion so we can get onto the things that we do like about the show, I would like to just go really quick, really fast, and let's list the top 2 or 3 things that we disliked the most about this series. I will go first. We already touched on it, so I'm going to hit the low-hanging fruit. The Moraine Swanson-Shay relationship was shoehorned in as an emotional manipulation of the audience that was completely unnecessary and did not further the story. The very casual sexual relationship between some of the Eamon's Fielders, also shoehorned in and didn't really further the story. To your point, Matthew, they could have, as they did in the books so brilliantly, they could have shown how much Egwene meant to Rand without them having to go into the back and roll in the hay. And third, some of the graphical representations, like the CG of the Trollocs, ended up coming up real slipshod and kind of poor, in my opinion. Daniel, what are the 3 things that you despised the most about the series?
Well, I mean, I think I've already kind of hit on 2 of those. I mean, I think those are the big 2 critical ones for me. I do think the mental illness effect they showed in the Taint with the false dragon, I think was fantastic. You saw the figures speaking to him, and I think it was really well done. With because you have to wonder, someone that's struggling with multiple personalities or other different type of mental illnesses, if it's very similar to that way. So I really like the portrayal of that.
But what didn't you like, though? What are the 3 things you didn't like?
Again, I didn't like was the fact that they changed the dragon, that scene, because I really felt like it took away. And
what do you mean by they changed the dragon?
Well, where they changed it so it's not just male.
Well, okay, yeah. So they opened it up to both male and female. I can also agree with that because I think it damages the story.
Yes, I think it damages the story, and it creates a giant plot hole that was never there.
And was unnecessary because later they declare Rand the dragon like they are supposed to.
Yeah. And then the one thing that I'm not a huge fan of is I feel like there's some things that they have admitted. Yeah, again, I know it's a reinterpretation, but there's some key components I feel like were left out that may be important when they come around to the second book or the next season. And then there were some things that they tied in from the other, the second and third book that kind of, I don't know if I like them yet, but I don't know.
If you're not sure, let's let Matthew talk
No,
about
okay.
his. Okay, go ahead.
I know I'm rambling here, but my
No,
mind's
it's okay.
finally connecting here. And I didn't realize it was such an annoyance until now. Perrin having a wife didn't exist, which is really affecting him, as a character. And I get they wanted to change something up, but because in the series, he accidentally kills her. They're in the heat of battle. She touches him. He swings around, axe to the gut. She dies. I can understand how that would mess someone up, but that didn't exist in the book.
It's completely contrived.
And it is. It's contrived. And again, something else that feels like it was forced in there to create something that didn't need to be there. The other things are just minor, but that definitely would be my number 3.
Matthew, what are 3 things that you did not like about the series?
Well, I'm going to go in ascending order from least bad to most bad.
Mhm.
So number 3 would be the loss of Barney Harris, the actor who played Matt Cawthon.
Oh,
There was a break they had to take because of COVID, and he wasn't able to come back for episode 7 and 8, and that's why that very awkward farewell at the end of episode 6 occurred, and why 7 and 8 seemed disjointed because they had to frantically rewrite the script to cover his story beats with some other character. He was great as Matt Cawthon.
He was a
and
great
his
Matt.
loss, I really felt. Number 2 for me would be the red herrings of the Dragon Reborn. All right, fine. Let's say you've got 5 candidates for the Dragon Reborn. They made an attempt to show how each one could possibly meet this description that Moraine gives in the first episode of who the Dragon Reborn could be, except for Rand. They really give just a couple of things, and people who already knew it was Rand were jumping up and down going, that's it, that's when he channeled the one power. But those who didn't, I'm like, what clues did you drop along the way to let the people know who was who? And with Perrin, there really was kind of some weak stuff, the golden eyes and the wolves, but does that make him the Dragon Reborn? Anyway, the way they handled that was really ham-fisted. The great potential, I think they missed the opportunity there. When they finally revealed that Rand is the Dragon Reborn, it was kind of like a Sherlock Holmes mystery where they withheld the critical clue until the very end when he's telling you what happened. That's not a fun mystery. I need to see the clue so when you tell me the solution, I can go back and go, oh, I should have figured that out. They didn't do that here. The number 1 egregious thing was the ending. Specifically the last 10 minutes of the last episode. Rand is facing off against the Dark One's proxy. It's the proxy. And this big, great battle that the whole season has been building up to. And Rand holds up his little magic item and puffs the Dark One away.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, it's the women who are all linked together that are destroying this huge Trolloc army. Now, in the books, and even Robert Jordan admitted that he wished he could have done that ending better. He wasn't sure where the story was going to go at that point, and he would have made some significant changes. But one of the things that was important is we've built up the dragon as this incredible channeler. Loghain's power, which is huge, is a candle as to the brightness of the sun, Moraine says in the series. So when the dragon comes into his power, the Dark One puffs away. How awesome would it have been if they'd stuck to what the books did, setting aside 21st century gender politics, and had Rand appear on the battlefield with his sangreal full of sardine, and I
oh my
won't
gosh.
even get into why that bugs me, but he brings this thing there, and we saw in the first episode Moraine, a single channeler, take on an army of Trollocs, and
Yeah.
it was amazingly
It
effective.
was awesome.
Now you have the Dragon Reborn facing a horde of Trollocs. Wouldn't there be some symmetry there? Wouldn't that be a
Yeah.
great callback? That's storytelling, where Rand on his own comes through and, like the brightness of the sun, obliterates this army. Now, the fact that he was male or female shouldn't have made a difference, because the story would have been fantastic. But they took this person that they said was supposed to be strong, and they gave him a meh climax, and they gave this big important part of the story to this other group. And it was really kind of questionable whether they should have the ability, with Amalisa being a very weak channeler, the other two just being some random female channelers that weren't powerful enough to have been kept by the tower, and then Egwene and Nynaeve, who are really strong, but they
untrained.
but untrained.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really make sense. Again, it's a continuity error, and you're drastically sliding the power scale here, and I feel that could damage the story and the point. You missed a fantastic punch in that climax.
And that scene just felt awkward. It didn't feel natural. And I get what they were trying to do, but it felt awkward and weird. And then everyone's eyes burned out, they drop dead, and then suddenly she heals her. Like, what the heck? I mean, yeah, it was so weird, such a weird scene to me.
Yeah, culminating at the like throughout all the items in my list of things I didn't like about this was how they chose to tell the story. If you imagine in your mind all the books and their threads and their plot points, if you take all those books and you line them up as if on a bookshelf, and then you shot a lightning bolt, a tiny lightning thread from the first book, snaking its way jaggedly all the way through to like book 8, that was kind of like what they covered in the first season. Again, like you said, Daniel, it's like, well, it's kind of like the first book. It's not really the first book. It's actually a lot of books. And they with the storytelling aspect, they were in such a rush to do so many cool things. They didn't stop to think, does this actually strengthen the story? Or am I undermining it by doing things too fast with not enough exposition and not enough demonstration and not enough throwbacks? Like the good storytelling aspects, the beats, instead of hitting the beats, they rushed the tempo and they dashed to the finish line, and it's completely awkward that way. Okay, hang on a second, guys. This part will get edited out. So we're already at almost 53 minutes. Do you think we should do a second episode with the positive aspects and make this a 2-parter?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'm sorry if I'm being too wordy. I apologize.
No. This is
honestly, this is how the shows end up being.
It's always
how we go. We always do this. Get into it. We enjoy it. It flows. And then,
do you mind if I introduce that idea then?
Yeah. No. Let's do that.
Okay. Ready? Time in. Hang on a second. You know what, guys? This has been a super great conversation. I've really enjoyed it, but I realize how long we're getting in the episode. What do you guys think about doing a part 2 where we talk about all the good stuff? Because there's a lot of good stuff.
There definitely is. I mean, I know we've kind of been talking about the negative stuff, but like, both Matt and I said in the beginning, this does have a lot of positive. It is a good series, despite the negatives we've spoken of.
And I would really like to, just like with the Filoni Insights, I want to find more value in this series than I have. I didn't hate the series, but man, I really left disappointed. So I'm hoping that maybe the positives that you guys saw will help to, add perspective and help me to enjoy the series more.
Well, and this is what I think the problem ultimately lies in, really, before we close out, is, when you sit down and you've been told a story by your favorite storyteller, you're invested. You love that story. You've gone on multiple runs down these road with these characters. I mean, Matt's clearly gone so many times he's worn out the first book. I have yet to do that. But those characters have become loved and cherished. And this story is that. It's like retelling retelling the story, your grandfather's favorite story. You love it so much, and then some guy, moves in and he tells the same story and it's completely different. It's the same story, but Uncle Bob didn't catch the fish. It was, Aunt Terry that caught the fish, and then the Boy Scout troop that came over and was super excited because it was a 12-foot long mackerel. No, it was a 40-foot mackerel, and it was a troop of Girl Scouts that came, and then they kicked Aunt Terry in the shin and stole the fish. It's kind of things like that. And it's like, well, wait a minute. No, I can't enjoy this thing, but it's still a funny story. I really enjoy this, but it's not the same. And I think that's where we're kind of running into, is we're seeing the same story, but it's just not the beloved story we're used to. And so it's coming off a little bit becoming a little bit more difficult for us to accept. Now, we could have Alton on the show that hasn't read the books, and he would probably come in and say, wow, I really enjoyed this series. It was pretty good, and this is why. And we would go, wow, I didn't think about that one. Or, because just how Alton is. Which it would be fantastic if he could join us on the positive.
I'm really hopeful that he can.
But if he can't, that's okay. It's still good, and we can still come up with things and have a fantastic discussion. So I know I'm pushing the limit here, but listeners, we do appreciate you spending the time going through this with you. Again, if you don't agree with our opinions, that's okay. We'd love to hear your opinions. I think that would be fantastic if some of you would actually write us. Send us an email at info@dungeoncrawlersradio.com. Give us your thoughts and opinions, and we'll read a few of those. I would love to hear how this series affected you, what your thoughts were. I think Krebs would agree.
Absolutely.
That would be fantastic, because, maybe that scene that we're struggling with did something for you. I know for us, it takes away from the scene, but maybe it did something for you. Maybe some of the points we brought up, you have a different insight that we haven't seen or spotted. I'd love to hear that. So it sounds like next episode will be part 2 of the Wheel of Time, which will be the positives from this series that we have found and discovered. So
thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for being automatically required to be here next week.
Yes, automatically required.
Success!
Which means, look at that, he's already wormed his way in.
He's already the 4th host.
My master plan is starting to unfold.
There can be only one Krebs.
Oh.
3 episodes from now,
it is.
Part of Joshua Krebs will be played by Matthew Krebs.
So what you're telling me is the 3rd episode of this will be Highlander. Ooh, we should have a random Krebs.
Oh. Krebs v. Krebs.
Uh-oh.
The winner gets the seat. The loser goes home crying.
If we're going to go Highlander theme, though, Josh, I think you need to stop while you're ahead.
However,
Oh,
we cannot finish this episode. I just realized there has to be a lightning round.
Well, okay. Now hang on. The lightning round occurred to me, but I thought we might save it until next episode, since this is kind of a 2-parter and we haven't hit the end yet.
Fair enough.
So, but I'm glad that you remembered, and I was going to tell crawlers, don't you worry. Lightning round is coming. I am not sparing my brother the lightning round.
All right. So with that said, folks, lightning round will be next episode. We'll come back at you with the positives we found in the Wheel of Time series on Amazon, and we'll catch you next time.
And Dungeon Crawlers, tell your story, whatever it may be.
And whether you're a die-hard book original or a brand new fan to the series, always remember to be epic and don't suck.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always. Dungeon Crawlers.